To the two or three people who may watch this, who are now going to be enlightened to why there's some parts of the Barrier Reef are being bleached. It's not because of global warming, as they say, because you can go to other places of the world, in Fiji, for instance, where the reefs can be quite beautiful in comparison with the Barrier Reef itself. And I went there a few years ago, and I met a botanist, a marine biologist, who was doing surveys of various reefs all over the world. He had another opinion on the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, which one has to consider. But there's also other reasons why that cause bleaching, which all ought to be considered. The first thing that ought to be considered, though, is when it comes to what politicians say, whether they're Labour or Liberal in this country, Australia, the best thing to do is to believe neither, because both of them will work to cover up what they don't want to be publicly known because of the damage it will be doing to them for hiding it, or damage it will do to other people for their role in anything. That's what these people are not actually what you call a politician with integrity and principle. They've proved that beyond any shadow of doubt. But the thing about the Barrier Reef, the most of the bleaching is caused by a few potential reasons. One of it in Queensland, in the adjacent land from the reef, for years, for centuries, a century or so, they've been spraying pesticides or herbicides upon the land, and they put all superphosphates on the land as well, tons and tons, millions of tons of superphosphates upon the land. And now, every time you get the big rains or the cyclones or the big flood, annual seasonal, the cyclonic seasons up there, the monsoon season, sorry, then you get billions of litres of water run off into the oceans with all the poisons now leaching out of the soils into the oceans. And then that's going up wherever the current's going, that flows into the alongside the Barrier Reef. It gets carried out there, and even the silts have gone, and which had dropped out before then. The poisons are all the whatever in that, all the results of superphosphates and the results of herbicides and pesticides is then it's still in the water, and that is more than likely, I've had it suggested, the cause of the bleaching along the Barrier Reef. And because of the impact it will have on people, on the sugar farmers, for instance, because they're a very powerful lobby group, extremely ancient, like the tobacco group. Sugar's a very powerful ancient lobby group. It's not just a new thing. They go around the world. The Sugar Association of the world goes back quite some time, because that's how they helped colonise the places in the world when they went around the world, did the colonies in the Caribbean and Central America, parts of the wherever they are in that Jamaica and around that area, the West Indies and other places. It's one way of establishing an income that then you can continue forever by simply getting everyone addicted to sugar. But that's what they did in Queensland. The addiction to sugar, and the people in the teas and the sugars and the cakes and everything they use it with, then creates a financial addiction to this, just like any other things that create an income. Once you've created an income that then a whole population benefits out of, then it's very difficult to extract yourself from that. So that's what they're protecting, more than likely, over the Barrier Reef. So they try and blame the coal, which makes no sense whatsoever, because if it was the pollution, there's no actual CO2 from coal, it makes no difference to Barrier Reef whatsoever, even if it did raise the temperature up a tiny bit, because the variation in temperatures on reefs all over the world, there's quite a difference in temperature. And there are warm places where the reefs are quite fine. So to say than they are at the Barrier Reef. Now, there are also other reasons why bleaching can occur, and they don't want you to talk about this because they're focusing on CO2, because they'd rather not discuss anything intellectually and rather mislead the public. Now they're on they've gone down the pathway of climate change, and they've misled the public so big on that they can't no longer say, "Oh, we may have made a mistake and misjudged things or miscalculated." They don't do that anymore. So they've gone down a road of misinformation, and they're now stuck on that road of misinformation, and they will try and feed misinformation into the public rather than say, hang on, we better have a really good review about where we're heading with this, because it's not only intellectually dishonest, it's also economically fraudulent. And then also there's other things happening in the oceans as well. With all the heat given off along the Pacific Rim, if you like, pertinent to New Zealand, with all the pressure going on with Christchurch, that's releasing, I don't seem to want to mention this, that's releasing millions of tons of hot gases somehow in the water, being released in the water on these edges of the tectonic plates. That also finds its way into the barrier reef. But this is another potential problem, what may affect the bleaching, may cause the bleaching, which is basically the dying off the algae. But the more unlikely, when you think about it, what algae is as a sort of a plant, then you have to say, what would cause it? Algae will grow on the very warmest of waters. Algae will grow in tight, tepid waters. You can put your hand. Just go and do a check somewhere where algae is growing and see how warm that water is. And usually, you put your hands in it, you will know immediately it's warmer than the water in the oceans and seas around the barrier reef. Just by that simple test alone, where algae is growing, will show you and suggest to you that it's not what they call CO2 causing it, but something else causing it. Something causing the algae to die off may well be an herbicide. Like people, and it's because it's been proven now. With the Captain Cook University tried to stop a scientist called Wid or Kidd, I forgot his name, that from actually disputing their findings. They tried to sack him for even having freedom of speech. They tried to sack him from doing his job as a scientist. Each scientist in the world is an independent, it should be a totally independent thinker. You can't be a scientist and belong to a collective. You can agree with other people, but when you start being a scientist and belong to a collective, you're no longer a scientist. You're just a part of a social clique agreeing to agree on something because it's financially beneficial to do so. That's the problem with the global warming theory and all that. It's financially beneficial to go along with it. And now it's politically expedient to continue the line that CO2 is somehow causing damage to the barrier reef, when we can basically see it's nigh on impossible when we can do a comparative analysis with comparative temperatures and waters elsewhere in the world and find out the coral reefs are fine there. So basically, more than likely, you have to weigh up all the possibilities that it's to run off in the annual monsoonal seasons, especially when you get massive floods, especially when you got bigger cyclones or whatever, get cyclones and get a massive runoff, goes back into the sea, and it leaches the poisons out of the land, and then that's making itself, the reefs are very adjacent to the land, and then that's somehow killing off the algae, and that's more than likely the likeliest cause of the bleaching along the barrier reef. You don't have to be a scientist to analyse things. This is a thing. Trying to make out, oh, you're not a scientist, so what did you know? Analysing things is a matter of logical rationalisation or logical deduction of all of the possible evidences, and then saying what could you possibly, based on known facts, like herbicides kill herbs or the flora whatever. It kills the weeds what get around the sugarcane and stuff like that. So obviously something that can kill weeds can kill an algae or something green and the barrier reef. It's just basic common sense. Most of it is basic common sense. Scientific analysation of it has not really occurred. They've said oh it's CO2 and left it at that, rather than taking an actual proper checking the qualities of water and checking the quality of water and finding out for certain whether the acidity or the alkali content of the water or whatever it is in there is detrimental to the growth of the algae on the corals, or whether it's something coming bubbling up from the tectonic plates and they're making its way up there through the vector currents and then also bleaching the corals. But also there's another thing that we're going through, so that they're getting solar flares also. That is also can be a problem. So to say it's just one thing like CO2 makes so little sense. It's not scientific because it can't be concluded. And you can't, even if you did know, it cannot be concluded. It's impossible to conclude and associate coal at anywhere, burning anywhere, with bleaching of the coral reefs and the Great Barrier Reef. Absolutely, totally. It's a totally unscientific. It's just purely political.